In a world of perfect loops, presets, and AI-generated music, it becomes harder and harder to truly stand out as an artist. But there is a special combination of two music production techniques that guarantee truly unique sounds that are personalized to you and that no one else can use. And the good news is these techniques are very powerful, but at the same time super easy to implement just using the stock tools in Ableton Live 12. So in this video, I'm going to share with you what these two techniques are, how you can combine them to create truly unique sounds in your own sessions. And at the end of this video, I'm going to reveal one of my personal favorite sound design techniques that I haven't shared anywhere else yet. Now I have some exciting news for you. In this video, we're going to have a special appearance by Robert Henke, aka Monolake, one of the most forward-thinking artists, one of the best sound designers on the planet in my opinion. He's going to join us at the end of the video and share some of his favorite little tips and tricks for getting to a unique sound. Stay tuned for that. So as I've mentioned, we need to combine two different techniques for this to work, and the first one is field recording. I've made it a habit to pay attention to the sounds that are in my environment. These can be natural sounds, these can be artificial sounds, whatever it is. I try to listen for something that sounds special, that resonates with me on a deep level, and then I try to capture it and store it in one specific folder. The good news is you don't need any fancy gear to do this. The standard voice memo app on your phone is good enough in most cases. You can obviously combine this with a microphone, and feel free to get a field recorder, but I promise you 80% of the sounds that I've collected so far are just me randomly recording something with my phone. Now there is one exception to this. When I go on vacation, I'm often visiting really interesting places like caves or singing stones. I always bring a little field recorder and a pair of headphones because then I have the time and the mental bandwidth to connect deeply with sounds, really record them properly, store them as sonic memories that then connect with the visual memories that I have. And this is a really nice emotional foundation to later work on because I get to revisit these places. Now, as you can imagine, this alone makes for really interesting, unique material as a starting point for your productions. But when you combine this with the second technique, it becomes really interesting. And that second technique is granular synthesis. But how does that actually work? Granular synthesis allows you to play with tiny pieces of sound. So instead of working with the whole sample, it breaks down audio into tiny individual pieces called grains. Each grain is a short slice of sound, typically less than 50 milliseconds. And you can then rearrange these grains, stretch them, pitch them up or down, or even layer them on top of each other to create entirely new and unique sounds. So in essence, I see granular synthesis as the perfect hybrid between sampling and synthesis. It allows you to go much deeper than you could with any sampler, but it also has a very different character and a way of working than normal synthesis. Alright, let's now combine granular synthesis and field recordings in an actual session. We're going to use my own collection of field recordings that I've grabbed over the past few years and throw them into Granulator 3, which is my personal favorite for granular synthesis. This happens in Ableton Live 12, and this is a good moment to kindly thank Ableton for sponsoring this video. So here I'm working on a song that almost exclusively consists of my own collection of field recordings. Only two kick drums and shaker loop. This is the stuff that I've used other samples for. Everything else is field recordings. And they are pretty wild actually, and I've processed them in interesting ways. Let me show you a couple. So this is how the song starts. Pay close attention to the texture you hear in the background. This sound here is a snippet from a field recording that I did just recording my dishwasher. And the way I go about these things is I just load in the complete recording and then I select a specific micro part or crop something that just sounds like it's giving me a nice rhythm. So for example, this other recording here. It's also coming from a really large file, and I've just listened to it and tried to find a rhythm that is inside the recording already. And then I use the warp markers and stretch it out in different ways so it fits my overall beat. So this is what it sounds like in context. You can use very creative effects inside Ableton Live that help you get the most out of these field recordings. So for example, one thing that I love to use is the phaser flanger or the corpus module. So the corpus sounds amazing because this way you can give your field recordings a specific texture. This, for example, is coming from just a water drop. So once again, this is just a small snippet of a large field recording. And Corpus is giving it some tonality, which I really, really like. But now let's up our game a little bit and run some of the field recordings to create textures, load them into Granulator 3 and see what we can get out of this. So let's say we want to create a deep, dark bass drone sound. One of the coolest materials you can use in granular synthesis is vocal recordings. So this is a field recording that I did inside of a cave in Sardinia, Malaga, something like this. I'm just going to throw this in. Now, inside of Granulator, the first thing you want to try out to manipulate is the grain size and the actual position. These are like the main controls that I would start with. Now, if you want to create a bass sound, obviously you want to pitch the material down. So right now it sounds like this. This is my mediocre singing, but don't worry, we'll get there. Already better. Now the cool thing is that you can also try to find tiny micro grooves in that material by playing with the grain size. This is one of my favorite tricks. So position and grain size in combination. So you hear this kind of pumping. Let's try this out with the material. Then you can also play around with the filter cutoff. So this is where a little bit of subtractive synthesis comes into play. Combined with the granulation process, this can make for exactly the type of evolving texture that you want to create. Okay, now let's add a little bit of life to that sound. So this is where this variation control comes into play. This basically gives you a bit more different grains to play with. If you then activate a little bit of scan, what it's going to do is going to scan through this waveform and not only play the grain selection. This is where you have to dial it in a way where it doesn't get to this end where it starts to sound thin. So these are the tiny little details you have to pay attention to. You can also spread it out even more to the sides. I would not recommend this necessarily for a bass sound, and you can also completely mono this if you want, but I kind of like this immersive bass sound here. Don't have a problem with this. In terms of modulation, this is where it starts to get interesting because you can also modulate with LFOs, with envelopes, and the cool thing is that depending on what you select in terms of controls, it shows you the different possibilities on what you can modulate. So let's say I want to modulate the variation. I can adjust this here and give it a little bit of low frequency oscillation that then works on this variation control. So I'm really happy with our bass, but that was just level 1 of granular synthesis. Let's do some more advanced stuff now. We're now going to create a really nice, rich sounding pad, and we're actually going to use a recording from the same session, but I'm singing slightly higher. The interesting thing is we have to now by ear tune the first recording and this one, so it makes sense in the track. And this is the beauty of granular synthesis. It allows you also to think beyond notes, because if you have a random field recording, there's not so much tonality necessary to it, or at least not in a given scale. And I like this. Let's just play around with this. And I'm going to use one of my favorite modes here. So in Granulator 3, they've included this cloud mode. The idea is that a lot of grains are playing on top of each other. So it gets like more rich, more dense. So once again, we're playing with grain size and position and also a little bit more variation. Sometimes you have these like slightly edgy tones, which can be super nice. Spreading it out. hear this slightly ringing high overtone here. This is why finding these micro sounds within granular synthesis is so much fun. You really have to dig deep into this. This is what I love about this process. Like, does it make sense? This is so nice, I love it. So now we found the sweet spot in this specific recording. We tuned it so that it fits with the rest. And now it's time to automate some of these parameters to make certain parts of the song more interesting. For example, one of my favorite parameters to automate is the grain size. So right now it's sounding super sweet. But if you now select it, press A for the automation lane, then you have already the grain size available. And what I like to do is, in parts where I want like a little bit more grittiness, I can just bring the grain size down. So it just starts to sound like this. The small tweaks that your listeners will love. This is the type of ear candy that they enjoy, that pulls them deeper into the sound, and they're wondering like, how the hell did they create this? Another cool parameter to automate is the spread. Now you have to be a bit careful because this can get out of hand quickly. If you do super experimental stuff, you can do whatever you want, but sometimes it's good to just be a bit more gentle and use it to just slightly nudge things into a certain direction. So you bring the sound to the edge of breaking apart, but not quite. Now this is the point where most people stop with granular synthesis. They're like, okay, this is a cool machine to create pads and textures, that's it basically. But no, you're actually missing out on a huge opportunity here, because we can use it for leads, we can make percussion sounds more interesting. Let's just try it out with lead sound. So for lead sounds, it's often a good idea to use more percussive field recordings. I've grabbed one in the garden of Pinuccio Sciola, which is a garden of singing stones. So he makes the sculptures that can produce tones, and I went in there with my field recorder and it sounds amazing. I spare you the details of tuning this, I've already done this, but listen to what this sounds like in context. Now obviously this is not perfectly timed right now, but we can grab a recording and fine-tune this a little bit. I want you to pay close attention to one little detail. If I play a melody, can you see the lower notes play these grains slower than the faster notes, which obviously has a rhythmic effect. So if you have rhythmic material, you can then play with these changes to create interesting little melodies. So I've penciled in something that I find quite cool. What I love about granular synthesis is this like slight imperfection in the material. This is what makes it organic. This is what makes it so unique. One cool control that you can play with is the shape, because that is the overlapping kind of fade in, fade out shape that plays between the grains. So how does one grain enter into the next one? And if you go to this direction, you get more of a snappy sound. And if you go into the other direction, it's kind of fading in. It's this type of bell shape. Now Now the cool thing is you can also dial in typical volume envelopes here. Assign the second envelope to other parameters also. So you could, for example, use the filter frequency and map the second envelope to it. So you just select a parameter and then you map the envelope to this, and it starts to give you some of the possibilities that you know from traditional subtractive synthesis. Beginning of this video, I've promised you a sound design technique that I haven't showed anywhere else on my channel yet. This is about to happen right now. Before we get there, if you got any value out of this video, consider subscribing, consider liking this video. It really helps a lot. So one of my favorite tricks is to use Granulator and then run it into the grain delay. Now the grain delay in and of itself is a super deep tool. Let me know in the comments if you want a special video just on that. But for now, I'm just going to throw this in and play around a little bit. The cool thing is that you have this XY axis, and depending on what you select here, you can basically then also automate this parameter and basically morph sounds from one sound into another. Now, what does a grain delay do? Well, it granulates the sound before then routing it into the delay path. And that gives you a lot of sonic possibilities. As you can see, you have different controls here. They are a little bit confusing because frequency, for example, I would much rather say this is kind of the grain size of the material. And then obviously you have the wet dry setting, the feedback of the delay, and all the usual parameters. And then you can pitch this. You can also randomize the pitch of the individual grains. And like always, use an LFO tool and map this LFO modulation device to, for example, let's try out the pitch. Now, as promised, I have an exciting bonus for you. I've managed to speak with Robert Henke, aka Monolake. He is the founding father of Granulator from version 1 to version 3. He's developed the latest version together with his team at Ableton, and he is also closely tied to the history of Ableton. What better person to ask than him? He's an incredible sound designer, really forward-thinking artist, and he is sharing a couple of really insanely valuable tips with you right now.
Starting from grain delay, there's something that I do a lot and really love it, is you put a grain delay in front of the reverb and you set the grain duration to the maximum size. I think it's 1 second or so, and the delay to the shortest possible delay. And then you add some slight random variation and you detune it by a fifth or an octave, and you send this in a reverb, and you got this kind of pitch shifted reverb effect, which I really like a lot. That adds some stuff to strings all the time and is great. Throw in whatever you're just working on and see what happens. I have no specific trick here. I like the fact that I can turn everything into this kind of ethereal, long, drone soup of atmosphere. I mean, when I started to build the very first granular synthesizer in 1997, my goal really was to create very lush, long, drony sounds. And this is still something I like to do. Anything that is tonal, put it in, find the perfect spot, have some randomness going on. And one parameter that is essential is the spread parameter, which basically detunes the left and right channel. And since the grain length is also a function of the detuning, that means that the grains start to get out of sync in left and right. And this immediately makes fantastic stereo sound. And trying to LFO everything, figure out what the LFO does to every single parameter and play with it. The grain shape, for instance, with maximum modulation range is very interesting, because then you get grains that have a percussive sound, and then you get soft grains and then percussive sound again. And if the LFO is running very fast, then you get this complex interaction between the grains and the LFO. And you might even get some interesting rhythmical stuff out of it that just emerges. And it sounds super groovy on one note, and it doesn't work at all if the pitch is slightly higher or lower. So you get immediately in this terrain where you're leaving the predictability and get something out that you can understand if you know the instrument, but you cannot predict. And for me, this is always the beauty of electronic music. Whatever I hear, most of the time I understand why I hear it, but before I hear it, I cannot predict if it's going to be like that. And I cannot predict if I like it, of course.
Right, now it's your turn. Grab a field recording, granulate the hell out of it, and have fun doing so. If you need help with finishing songs, I have a free gift for you. It's called the Finisher Framework. 3 simple steps you can use to finish at least one great sounding song per month. You can get it at pickyourself.com/framework. The link is also in the description. See you in the next video.